In this section, we will compare and contrast different types of nervous structures. We'll talk about the sympathetic, parasympathetic, and somatic nervous systems. We will talk about their origin in the central nervous system, the number of ganglion pathways, the ganglia locations, the neurotransmitters, and then the receptors and their actions that that affect them. So in the sympathetic nervous system, you have them starting at approximately T1 and they go to approximately L2 on the spinal cord. In each sympathetic nerve pathway, there is a preganglionic and a postganglionic path, and so there are two neurons in their pathway. The location of the ganglia for the sympathetic nervous system are in the sympathetic chain ganglia and in the collateral ganglia. And on that subject, there are four types of sympathetic nerves. The first goes into the sympathetic chain ganglia and it synapses there, and it moves into a spinal nerve, and those spinal nerves go to innervate the skin and the blood vessels. The second type will also synapse in the chain ganglia, and then it will move into a sympathetic nerve, and it will innervate anything above the diaphragm. The third type, it will actually go through the sympathetic chain ganglia without synapsing, and then it will go into the collateral ganglia and it will synapse there. And at this point, it's known as a splanchnic nerve, and it will innervate anything beneath your diaphragm. And then the fourth type of neuron is where it goes out of the lateral horn in the spinal cord through the sympathetic chain ganglia without synapsing, and it also goes through the collateral ganglia, and it goes into the adrenal medulla, and it synapses there, and there it releases neurotransmitters such as norepinephrine and epinephrine into your bloodstream directly from that adrenal gland. So the types of neurotransmitters in sympathetic typically are in the presynaptic neuron are acetylcholine, abbreviated ACH, and then in the postsynaptic neuron, it is usually norepinephrine or epinephrine, so NE and EPI. The receptors that these typically go to are alpha 1 and 2 and beta 1, 2, and 3 receptors. So an alpha 1 and through 2 and a beta 1 through 3 receptors. These are known as the fight or flight nervous system, is that sympathetic nervous system. And we'll come back and talk about their actions in a little bit. The parasympathetic nervous system has most of its origin in the central nervous system from the vagus nerve, cranial nerve number 10. So I'll just put cranial nerve 10, is that X in Roman numerals. And then it also comes out of the S2 to 4 region through your sacral region, so through S2 to 4. These ganglia location are called terminal ganglia. So they are what synapse right where the effector is. So it will go all the way through, this is the wrong spot. So there are two here as well. It does do a pre and postsynaptic, but it moves all the way through all the way through to the terminal end, and it synapses at its effectors. Sorry, just move each one of these over one. So just to reiterate, cranial nerve 10 and sacral region 2 through 4 is where it comes out of the CNS. And then there are two in each pathway, and then its ganglia location is the terminal location. In this specific type of neurons. The pre and the post are both acetylcholine, so ACH. This acetylcholine will be released on both of those. And this is known as the rest and digest type of nervous system, and it mostly innervates muscarinic receptors, so that's M1 through 5. Then we'll move down to the somatic quickly. The somatic nervous system is your motor control, and those all come from the ventral horns of your spinal cord. So the ventral horn. There's only one neuron in that pathway. It moves all the way through to whatever skeletal tissue it is innervating. And so its ganglia location is at the tissue. So wherever it's going, if it's going into your skeletal muscle in your arms, and wherever that skeletal muscle in your arm is where the ganglia will be. It releases acetylcholine in the somatic nervous system, and it is also a muscarinic type of receptor, 1 through 5. So the receptors of your body can be broken down into what they do and how they act. So there's one other type of receptor that we did not talk about. If this were to be a pre-ganglionic and a post-ganglionic terminal here, when acetylcholine is released here, because it's released first in every type of neuron, there's a receptor here known as N2, which stands for nicotinic receptor. The nicotinic receptor will always be excitatory, 1 or 2. N1 is typically in the somatic nervous system and it's used in skeletal tissues. The nicotinic receptor is excitatory, which continues to push action potentials down neurons as they travel. The two different types of receptors, other than the alpha, beta, and muscarinic recepting, is when they are excitatory or inhibitory. One rule of thumb is that even numbered receptors are inhibitory. Let's put an I for that, INH. And then odd numbered are excitatory. So in the case of a sympathetic nervous system, the alpha-1 receptor is adrenergic. That adrenergic receptor is because of what is released at the postsynaptic cleft. When epinephrine and norepinephrine are released, then it is considered adrenergic. And when acetylcholine is released out of the post in the parasympathetic, that is known as a cholinergic receptor. So if alpha-1 were to be contacted with norepinephrine, it would cause an excitatory movement. We use beta-1 and heart tissue. So if beta-1 were to get innervated with with epinephrine, your heart would pump faster. It would increase because of the excitatory nature of that. If you were to take beta-2, which goes into the lung tissues, as action potentials reach beta-2, it creates an inhibitory response, and your body would have bronchodilation. Those muscles would loosen, and you'd be able to breathe easier because of that inhibitory nature. In almost every part of your body, you have dual innervation of the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems, and one just usually takes control over the other. You don't turn one off and turn one on. One is just stronger than the other, usually at all times. There are a few exceptions to some of these rules. The first exception is that blood vessels are never ever innervated by the parasympathetic nervous system. Blood vessels are taken care of by the sympathetic nervous system and the alpha-1 receptors. They are cholinergic in nature. The sweat glands have, excuse me, they're not cholinergic in nature. That's my bad. The sweat glands have a general and local sweat glands. The general sweat glands are cholinergic, and they are also taken care of by the the sympathetic nervous system. The sympathetic nervous system typically releases that norepinephrine or epinephrine, but in this case it's cholinergic and it releases acetylcholine to muscarinic odd receptors to excite the sweat glands to start sweating. And then the local sweat glands, it is innervated by the alpha-1 receptor, and that is done by an adrenergic. So norepinephrine or epinephrine will reach the sweat glands, and that will cause sweating in localized specific areas.